When we're engaging in self-reflective practices, we are affording an opportunity to really maximize the potential, not only for self, but also for the team that we are charged with serving.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of everybody's favorite podcast, award-winning podcast, I might add, 80% Mental. We have sort of migrated from talking purely about sport and performance psychology to thinking about health and well-being and how we can use lessons from sport and performance psychology and exercise psychology in our everyday lives for people who perhaps aren't necessarily in the performance sphere. We've had some really great episodes so far this season, so make sure you go and check out our back catalogue at some point. But Leah's back. Leah's back with us today. Leah, how are you doing?
I'm great, all things considered.
And Leah's. It's a reasonable time of day for you as well for a change.
It is, actually. Sorry, my dog's trying to eat my arm.
Which dog's with you today?
Doug Williams is currently trying to eat my arm, and then Friedrich von Trapp is just looking very forlorn. He's clearly being neglected.
Amazing. Well, it's good to have you back anyway. Today's podcast, we're going to talk about leadership, and I think when we talk about leadership, it's easy to think that it's not relevant if you're not in a leadership role or you're not kind of aspiring to be in a leadership role. But I think that the more that we all understand what good leadership is, what good leadership isn't, I think the more we understand that, the better, especially given the state of some of our current leadership. And I'm speaking to you guys in America, and obviously I'm here in the UK. I think understanding leadership is like a really important thing for all of us, and there's a benefit to understanding that, and perhaps what leadership identity is as well. So we're going to talk about that today. Leah, who are some of the great leaders that spring to your mind?
Oh gosh, I think I have to say I had this might be an unconventional choice. I used to teach at George Washington University, and the chair of my department was incredible. And I think part of it is because she had a coaching background. She was a volleyball coach. And so she was one of the few people in an academic setting who could run a meeting, decide on what needed to be done, get things done, work through all of the things and mobilize people to attack a problem and fix things. And I think she's somebody who took leadership very seriously. I think from an American standpoint, Barack Obama, I think, is a really great leader. I think he took being the president very seriously. And one of my favorite things about him is that he would have this mantra called "hard things are hard," and that if nobody else in the government could solve the problem, it would land on his desk, right? He was there to make the big decisions, and if they got to him, by default, no one else could have solved that problem. And so recognizing that I have this whole big system, I have all these experts, and I have people who can solve problems. So if they can't do it, then I'm the one, it's up to me. And he would have this thing of hard decisions are hard. I can't sit here and pretend that they're going to be easy. And he had it on a little plaque on his desk that said hard things are hard. And sort of really leaning into I didn't take this job because it's easy. And I didn't take this job because I thought it was going to be some kind of fun ride. And I think that had a lot to do with just sort of how he approached that job generally.
Well, we're gonna kind of get into leadership qualities, what makes a good leader, how we might develop that leadership identity, and we've got the perfect guest with us today to talk about this. I'm so excited because I wanted to get this guest on the podcast for ages, actually, and I'm so thrilled and pleased to introduce Dr. Angel Brutus, clinical sport and leadership consultant. Dr. Brutus, welcome to 80% Mental.
Thank you so much for having me. And Leah, that was Phenomenal. Just pulling that thread and listening to you speak about some of that. And yeah, let's get into it because I have all kind, like you just unlocked all of the ratatouille
Oh, hell
responses
yeah.
in my brain.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
So just by way of introduction for our guests, Dr. Brutus is a certified mental performance consultant and the president and CEO of Synergistic Solutions, which is a consulting firm designed to support the professional development of high performance professionals in multiple different contexts. So that includes sport, but also business and the performing arts. And Dr. Brutus, tell us a little bit about your work with the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee Psychological Services team. Is that something you serve on?
Yeah, so I am actually still currently a member of that particular internal team that is housed within the USOPC's sports medicine department. And as you can imagine, it's a national organizing committee, so it's an NOC within the larger scope of the international landscape. And our psychological services team is comprised of individuals who are dually trained, both clinically and in the field of sport performance psych. And came into it initially exclusively focused on mental health and well-being. And then over the last few years, there have been different iterations of the role and the function. And so moved into a leadership role within that particular organization and system. And as you can imagine, learned lots in terms of doing that in a high performance kind of system as well.
Yeah,
and then recently just made the transition into academia, as we were just discussing. And so I'm now back in more of the practitioner role within the USOPC. Is one of the many locations and hats that I wear.
Yeah. And of course, you're heavily involved in ASP as well, the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. But I was reading in your bio that you started off in speech and language therapy. Is that right?
I did. Yes, I did.
And then sort of rehabilitation counselor. Like what prompted the jump, I guess, or the switch from starting out there to kind of sport and performance psychology?
On the surface, I'll even take it a little bit further. It's even more bizarre. My original interests were in zoology.
Oh, really?
So understanding the behavior of animals.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Okay.
And fast forward, in many respects, sport performance psychology is no different. When you get down to it, because we're very primitive,
similar, yeah.
very similar in a lot of different ways. But yeah, my undergrad is in speech language pathology, and realized as I was doing the work with the clientele that I was serving across different developmental stages, different age groups, different presentations in terms of speech impediments and learning disabilities, that I felt like I needed to be doing more. And so I could not find myself exclusively focusing just on the speech and the language aspect of things, knowing that there were so many other things that were just being impacted. So I made that transition in grad school, changed majors, and it was between two pathways, actually. The first option was rehabilitation counseling, and the second option was urban planning.
Okay.
And people literally look at me just like you did, where you're like, urban planning, that seems like a far reach. But I always had this desire to better understand ways to impact systems. Mm-hmm. And urban planning was attractive to me because I understood the depth of having that particular training and understanding on ways to influence access to certain services and resources based off of the planning, right? So that was one entity. And then the other pathway, like I said, was rehabilitation counseling. And then my logic and rationalizing with myself came in, and it was just like, okay, what is going to accept all of these transferred credits? So rehabilitation counseling won out. So that's how that came about.
But yeah, let's get into today's topic, which is all about leadership. And Dr. Brutus, I want to ask you the same question that I asked Leah at the start. Like, who are some of the great leaders that spring to mind for you, and like what makes them so in your eyes?
So, Leah, you stole a little bit of my thunder there. I wasn't going to go with President Barack Obama. I was going to go with First Lady Michelle Obama.
Oh, yes. Hell yeah. I'm all for it.
Again, and it kind of ties into what I said earlier. Like sometimes, being a leader doesn't necessarily mean that you hold the title. It's really about the influence and the impact. No shade to President Barack Obama. I know he does amazing things, but Michelle just seems to have certain levels of approachability and familiarity and humanness. Those qualities that really kind of stick out when I think about her. Literally, I just call her Michelle like we're best friends and we've never met. So that's more global. And then I started thinking about someone that's more proximal to me. And two people distinctly, come to mind. One of those people is Marlon Harris, who happens to be the pastor of a church that I used to attend when I used to live in Atlanta. And to this day, I'm still engaged with that church. And a lot of that is because of my gravitational pull towards someone who is willing to teach and not just indoctrinate like their own beliefs and thoughts, but teach you how to also understand the content and arrive at your own assessment. Right. And so that's one person. The other person that's also a little bit more closer proximity is Dr. Timothy Rice. So very similar to you, Leah. This is an instructor during my training with my doctoral program within sport and performance psychology. This was someone who was the very first instructor that called me doctor long before I was finished with the program. I think it was actually one of the very first courses that I took within the program. And we sit down, and before we start the course, he tells us to take our nameplates and write the word doctor in front of it and just sit with that. And so for him, the reason why he comes to mind is because he always had this knack for seeing something in you that you could not see in yourself yet.
Right.
And so debunking this myth that you don't belong is another strong quality. And to this day, Dr. Rice and I still stay in touch. And then when I think even more central to my day to day, the other entities that came up were my children. Okay. And for some of us as adults, we forget the wisdom that is held by younger generations. And so it's my children. They come up for me because they hold me accountable. They don't accept the fluff, right? They don't allow me to have this mask of perfection. And so it's them that actually also teach me certain qualities in leadership where there is this space to be human, acknowledge what you don't know. And even when you're in this role, in this position where there is an expectation for you to lead, you can lead imperfectly. Because it helps everyone involved to get to a different place in a space where they truly understand and value their own intuitiveness as we're cultivating and co-creating this space together. So those are the entities that come to mind.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you talk about your kids there as leaders, and some of the kind of qualities that they bring out in us as adults, I guess. And it kind of leads on to the next question I had, really, which was that there's this kind of persistent myth in sports, especially, I think, that leaders are born and not made. There's just this sort of set of qualities that just people just have. Some people have them, and some people just don't have them. And I guess I just kind of wanted to get your take on that, really. I kind of suspect I know where you're going to go with this, but like, what do we do with that myth? Like, what's your take?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like a softball question there because you have the word myth in the question, right? And so
I realized that as I said it.
But no, it invokes thought, right? And so part of this is the curiosity. And I think it boils down to like, we can get very prescriptive and talk about like the different models of leadership. I think one that people lean heavily on is like, you get into the adjectives of it, like the autocratic and democratic and all of those things. But at the core essence of it all is like the intent and the purpose behind all of it is to maximize human potential, right? And if that is at the core, then yes, there may be some inherent characteristics that people hold that might actually be a gravitational pull towards certain people who would have an affinity for that type of style, where there may be others, it's a learned style or it's a learned trait, or because of environmental influences, it's a necessary trait that has to be had. I think about my own upbringing, and, in the clinical space, we call it, sometimes we can pathologize it, where it's like, you were a parentified child, meaning that you had to, function as an adult during a stage of development where you should be playing, right? Mm-hmm. And, on one hand, it works out great in terms of leadership development early on. And in other times, it's like, man, like you're grieving childhood because you didn't really have the full experience of it, right? Yeah. And so I think, in answering that question, yes, it's a myth because everyone's unique circumstances, background, and experiences informs, one, how they potentially lead, but then also the type of leadership that they are attracted to, especially if the core essence of this is to maximize human potential.
That's one of my biggest frustrations, I think, in sport is like there's such a narrative around like, oh, well, you just can't teach that, right? Of like, oh, that just can't be taught. They're just like that. And I'm like, I feel like that's not true. And it's not even just that, like you said, Angel, that, certainly some people have an affinity for a particular style or whatever. But it also negates the fact that there are different leaders for different moments, and that context is everything. And, when we think about like, well, what is a good leader? Well, it's kind of like, well, for what? What kind of leader are you looking for, right?
It depends, right? Like I remember being a part of an organization at one point in time in my career where they brought in no shade, where they brought in Navy SEAL.
I feel like there might be a little shade.
There's always shade coming when somebody says no shade.
I don't mean this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Where they brought in Navy SEALs to work with a particular group of individuals.
See that all the time.
Who that particular dynamic in that particular team environment, that was like pouring gasoline on a fire. And to your point, and I bring that up, Leah, because circumstances matter, right? It's the situational characteristics that are at play, like knowing the type of approach to take depending on those circumstances. Had it been the same team a year prior, have at it. But where they were in their developmental stage, a lot of, lack of a better word, shared trauma that occurred, like all of these things was like the perfect storm. So there was a lot of cleaning up to be done after the fact, right? But I say that because part of this idea of leadership also is having a pulse on what your people need.
So what exactly is leadership identity? Because that's kind of what we're talking about. That's kind of what we titled the episode. Like, can we define that?
I like to break words down.
Okay.
And if I took leadership off the board right now and just focused on identity defined can mean a number of different things. Some of us are walking around with prescribed identities. Some of us understand what are subscribed identities, and some of us haven't figured that out yet, right? So let's just start there for a second. If I am having difficulty acknowledging, one, who I am, what my needs are in the moment, having a full understanding of how I might respond to any given moment, and I am placed in a position where I am expected to fully lead when I haven't even engaged in leading self, that can become an issue, right? And so from an identity standpoint, it boils down to self-concept. How do I see myself? How do I engage in behaviors that align with how I see myself? What are some of the circumstances, again, environmentally, that call for certain aspects of my identity to manifest and behave? Now I can add the word leader in front of that, or leadership, and actually the base word lead. what are some of those factors that I'm considering that helps me to make these ongoing decisions, these iterative decisions, as circumstances and situations call for, right? And so if we are allowing ourselves that space, then ultimately it becomes more about understanding the agility that's necessary in our approach versus being exclusively tied to one particular description of a leadership identity. Am I making sense? I feel very philosophical in that, but
no, absolutely, yeah, I think so. So you talked about those ideas of a prescribed identity, so the identities that are sort of almost given to us versus identities that we kind of develop ourselves in place and in context and in time, and kind of pulling on all of those things, I guess, to sort of think about how we might respond in particular situations, in particular leadership situations. Is that kind of a reasonable summary?
yeah, like it makes me think about some of the leaders I support, say in the corporate space. And for some, there's more of that traditional model where, they have a leadership role and title, and they might have a small team.
Mm-hmm.
In comparison to someone who has a leadership title and role and has a massive team. Those two distinct individuals are probably going to have a very different need and approach to ensuring that at the end of the day, they are still maximizing that human potential to achieve and attain the goals that have been set as a collective, right? And I bring up those two distinct different types in this conversation because I often find that the one who anticipates leading the masses starts off feeling so overwhelmed and not knowing where to start. Because they inherently have this idea that it's impossible to have a pulse on every single person's needs. Like I can't even find 15-minute windows to have a meeting with every single person on my team. I think the reason why those two examples come up as well is it highlights, in my opinion, how far away we can get away from the fundamentals when we make things seem or acknowledge that things are just way bigger than they have to be.
And when you say fundamentals, what do you mean by that?
Forgetting our values. Right. Making the situation so big that we abandon that in some way. Forgetting why we said yes to this role. For some, myself included, sometimes I have found myself being voluntold into a leadership role. And it's like, okay, we're here. Again, it goes back to the earlier statement I said where sometimes it just chases me down.
Did you say voluntold?
Voluntold, yes.
I like that. I've never heard that before.
Absolutely been voluntold to be in a leadership position.
Right, Leah? Talk about it, Leah. Like, that's a thing.
And it's interesting because, like, for me, my natural inclination, I actually don't like to be in charge. I like to be second in command. I'm a behind the scenes girly. Like, I don't want to be, I'll do all the work. But it's like, oh, you have opinions. You get to be a leader. No, thank you.
Leah, speak on that, right? Like, when I look back over the course of my career, that's pretty much how it's panned out. It's like, oh, you have opinions. Like, you keep adding to the conversation. I think you'll be good for this. And it's like, oh. And so for a long time, it's like you kind of go along with it. And then at some point, you're like, but no, I can actually lead from behind the scenes. I don't have to have the title.
So this is the 80% Mental podcast, and I'm here with my co-host, Leah Washington, and our guest today, Dr. Angel Brutus. And we've been talking about leadership and leadership identity. And Dr. Brutus, we were just talking there about almost kind of like the fundamentals of leadership identity, and we're kind of almost getting into this idea of how leadership identity is formed, right? And some of the things that you've been talking about as being important, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems to be things like understanding our own strengths and values in particular seem really important. What are our core values and how are we bringing them out? Boundaries as well. And that sort of real kind of self-awareness is that sort of foundation of developing a leadership identity, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about how that identity is developed, and maybe like what sorts of things like influence how people start to see themselves in leadership positions?
I'm glad that you did that summary, because I forgot that I said all of that. I think one of the things that I will also add to that is knowing where your growth edges are. Actually, I think knowing your growth edges along the lines of like that increased self-awareness, knowing your growth edges is like the litmus test for a lot of things, right? Your growth edges, for many respects, it exposes where there are opportunities to continue to kind of develop. And it also gives you hints and clues into moments where you might also be very tender if there are other people that you are charged and tasked to lead who might actually further expose those areas of growth.
Can you just tell me what you mean by growth edges? Because I've not come across that phrase before.
Yeah, so growth edges, in its simplest form, is like weaknesses. I tend to not say weaknesses because I even see those areas that we need to grow as like jewels, right? That's the richness. When you're able to identify those areas where there is something left to be desired, that leads you into that learner's mentality. Right, which is another fundamental. Like being able to really tap into a leadership identity means that you're willing to identify the things that you don't know. But there also, I love saying, like, with increased awareness means also increased responsibility to do something about it. Right, and so if you're aware of those areas of weakness, if you're aware of those growth edges, those opportunities for more, then now it's up to you to be able to also seek out how to fill those gaps.
Yeah.
And or leverage the talent of the people that you are tasked to lead to help fill in those gaps, right? Because part of this leadership philosophy that I tend to hold is that you're doing things not for yourself, you're doing things for the betterment of individuals that are coming after you. And it's not even the immediate individuals, it's the people who don't even know that this opportunity exists yet, right? And so now you're looking further down the line.
So it sounds like one of the things that you're saying is that like one of the most important pieces of being a solid or an effective leader, I should say, is this idea of self-reflection and self-awareness. I'm wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit more about that idea.
When we engage in self-reflective practices, there's so much that comes up. It helps us to better understand the why we respond the way that we do when potentially our leadership philosophy is being challenged, if the decisions that we're making is being challenged, if for whatever reason there's and this is the clinical side of me, if a negative core belief has been activated and it has taken over the narrative, right? And then that has a ripple effect in terms of how we end up responding to the people that we're leading. It ends up showing up in how we respond to the systems that we're navigating, especially if there becomes like a huge gap in alignment between who we, again, self-concept and what we are being tasked and charged to do. If there is a huge gap in between there, that leaves so much space and room for all of the noise and the clutter and all of the stuff to get in between. But when we're engaging in self-reflective practices, what happens is that we now are increasing our awareness about what is going to get us going. What are some of the potential barriers or roadblocks or hurdles that we might anticipate? And we're able to further close that gap, where there's still going to be some things that are going to contribute to like our distress, because distress as a leader has implications for the health of the rest of your team and the system if you're not careful. Right. But the more that we're able to engage in such practices and close that gap, the more that we are affording an opportunity to really maximize the potential, not only for self, but also maximize the potential for the team that we are charged with serving.
So one of the things I was thinking about when I was kind of preparing for this podcast was, what are the things that can prompt that level of self-reflection? Because there's loads of stuff, isn't there? Like, I'm thinking like transitions, for example, transitions from one organization to another, or from, like, in sport, like an athlete moving from a junior level to a senior level, or like all of those transitions are kind of things that like prompt that level of self-reflection and maybe identify those growth edges. I like that term. I'm going to start using that. What are kind of some of the other things, some of the other experiences, in your experience, that prompt people to reflect on their leadership identity, I guess?
Yeah. So, I am not perfect at it, but I learned, just for my own personal practice, to actually work with somebody.
Okay.
I can't consult with myself, right?
Uh-huh.
Consulting with yourself, you're guaranteed to get a yes, right? I don't need to be a yes person for myself. So working with someone has really been extremely helpful, and not necessarily working with someone when there have been issues or concerns that have arisen. It's being very intentional about it becoming a part of the fabric of what I do. um, Having an opportunity to even just spitball out loud, even if it's not for the purposes of like coming out with a solution,
Mm.
just unlocks and it unblocks so much. Like literally putting it on calendar, like having a self-reflective moment. Like, let me debrief this week. What happened? What went extremely well? And not just like take an inventory of what went well, what didn't go well, but what were some of the antecedents that I believe or I'm attributing that led to this outcome. If I had to revisit a conversation that I had, say, for example, with the direct report, did I fully understand what they were sharing with me? And if there are still knowledge gaps that I have, I am committing to returning to that conversation with that direct report to ensure that this is not a one-time conversation. This is something that I am intentionally returning back to them for two reasons. One, to increase clarification on my end, but then two, to let them know that they're important enough to me that I want to make sure that their engagement and their encounter with me mattered. When I look at the academic space that I've transitioned into, and I think about the students that I am, charged with supporting their development, being very intentional about noticing if there's a shift and a change in certain behaviors, even if it's an online program. Someone might have started off with great energy and they've been turning in everything on time or even early. And then all of a sudden I'm noticing that they're rubbing up against deadlines. That's not typical behavior from them.
Mm.
I'm going to check in. So for me, I think another core aspect of leadership is being able to truly see your people and let them know that you see them. And part of that is the investment in time, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how it's relationships. We're in the business of relationships, and that can't get lost in this conversation about leadership and leadership identity.
Sure. And I think that comes back to values again, doesn't it, really?
Absolutely. I use this analogy all the time. The higher up you go on a mountain, the air is thin up top.
Yeah.
And so, even for leaders, there's this moment where you look to your left and look to your right, and there's very few people that you can consult with. And so then, depending your predisposition, what does that look like in terms of the relationship with the people who are reporting to you? Are you leaning heavily on them for that sense of connection that you once used to have when you used to be a peer? Because you're not getting it up top? And how does that then influence the dynamics of that relationship if you are in a hierarchical kind of system? Right? So you have like all these little nuanced things. And that's the reason why I say sometimes, in comparison of the two leaders that I talked about earlier, where one is like masses that they are responsible for versus a little bit more refined, small structure, both can feel very lonely, but there's an exacerbation that comes with that in terms of like this feeling an absence of connection.
I think it's really true for athletes who especially make that transition from being an athlete to being a coach, where they're used to being in a certain role on a team, even if they were a captain on that team, that now they're in a coach position. And like you said, having that peer-to-peer relationship is no longer there. Now they're in a different role. And I think it can be so, so challenging, right? Because you're in the exact same environment with a lot of very similar people and everything is the same except for your role. And that role conflict can really sort of like emerge. And and so I think a lot about like, what are your thoughts on like, how do we prepare people to make those transitions? Like those transitions are so important. Like Pete was saying, how do we anticipate that?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation that is being held in terms of like the coach as the performer, in addition to, to your point, especially if it's like the same team, making that
Yeah.
transition is one thing. Like making the transition to a different team, there's a little bit of a buffer in that experience, but still kind of like untethering from that athlete identity a little bit. And what does that really look like to make that transition into a coaching identity is crucial, right? And so I think about like now getting into the more prescriptive side, you have the multidimensional leadership model. And within that, you take into consideration a lot of different characteristics. You take into consideration the situation and the circumstance, which we kind of talked about earlier. You also take into consideration the leader's characteristics. And so that could be their age, stage of development, the level of experience, the amount of experience, what their personality is, like all of these different, like very unique individual characteristics of the leader. And then you also have, you can't miss or overlook the characteristics of the team and the membership of the team. Because again, that goes back to what I shared earlier, like depending on the leadership style, that also has a certain attraction for certain personalities, right? So you have like all of these different dynamics at play. And so when you talk about preparation of leaders to kind of make that transition from peer to peer to a little bit higher up in terms of a hierarchy, that in itself requires a lot of intentionality. It requires intentionality, to your point, what you said earlier, Leah, in terms of role clarification. It requires some intentionality in terms of calling it what it is and not just assuming that everybody, like it's on everybody's radar, because 9 times out of 10, it's not. Um, and it's not just a one time conversation. It's something that's kind of interwoven in all of the conversations over time, right? It's like, okay, I know that, when I was, for example, I use like a basketball team. I know when I was your teammate, these are some of the things that we were doing. As I'm moving into, because typically what happens, say in basketball, is like they'll come on as like, I don't know, maybe like the ops person for a second. So they're a part of that coaching structure, but they're not like the direct skills coach or anything like that, right? And so there's like this progressive buffered experience that takes place where it's like you've been extracted from this particular social structure and you're still so new to it that 9 times out of 10, the rest of the coaches might not see you as a peer yet. So now you're like finding yourself in this in between space or in purgatory, I like to say, right? And you're looking to your right, looking to your left. You can't really lean on your teammates because now you have to create a little bit of space because you know all the background stuff that's happening. Mm-hmm. And you want to give them the freedom and the latitude to still be who they're going to be because their encounters with you are going to be sanitized. Because at this juncture, at this particular transition time, they don't know that they can trust that whatever behaviors and activities that they're engaging with is not going to get back to the coaching staff, right? And so you've got those elements. And so that's another piece that's crucial for leadership is creating a space where your people can trust you. Mm. And you get one shot at that. This is not something that, you can kind of toy around with and play like it's a ball of yarn and you're a cat. Like, no. Trust is so crucial. I can't even begin to tell you how. Like, if people share something with you as their leader and they hear any residue or remnants of any of it from somebody else that's not you, it's done. Right. So using that example of like transitioning from peer to peer to leadership, you got to call it out. I think the other piece of that does not get talked about a lot is understanding almost like this middle management role. And I've even found myself asking more about that in recent years. Like, what does this middle management, for lack of a better term, role really look like, right? Where you're reporting down as you're leading people, but you're also reporting up as you're trying to tell the story and make sure that upper management, upper leadership has at least a semblance of a pulse of what's going on down here, right? And so you're finding yourself like in this in between. There's a lot of in between, and maybe that's just because of where I am chronologically in age, but it's very prevalent on my radar right now.
I mean, I've been in academia for a long time, and I've been wondering what middle management do for like 20 years now. I still don't really know. I get myself in trouble. I want to just before we take another quick break. I wanted to ask you if values are a really important part of leadership identity, right? I mean, you talked earlier on about these prescribed values, or prescribed identity, sorry, versus kind of our own sense of identity. This is like a kind of a big question, but I want to ask you, like, how do things like gender and race or cultural expectations, like, how do they impact on leadership identity development? Like, that's a huge question. I'm aware that's a huge question, but do what you want with it, basically. Answer as much or as little of it as you want.
I think the first thing that comes to mind to me is, understanding that all of these different systems and spaces that we find ourselves navigating, it's a microcosm of society, right? And I think about the ecological systems approach to things. And if you think, it even goes back to my first answer about who came to mind, right? And I talked globally, and then I got a little bit closer to proximity.
Yeah, sure.
It's the same concept, I think. And it's a disservice if we pretend that the larger systems don't have influence and impact on how we navigate the smaller systems. When you think about race, when you think about gender, when you think about ethnicity, you think about culture, you think about nationality, there's a global influence that I think takes place. And depending on the societies that we navigate, whether they're patriarchal, whether they are collectivistic in comparison to individualistic, I think all of that comes into play. And in full transparency, I'll even share a little bit of my own experience as, if you can't tell, I'm a very collectivist person. Like, it's all of us. How can this impact everybody? That sometimes does not align well in certain systems that amplify messaging of self-promotion. That's the word. Where in some spaces self-promotion is rewarded, right? I think corporate space, like when people are going up for partners, they're trying to sell themselves and themselves only. They're not acknowledging too much of what everyone else has contributed, because they're the ones that's up for this next level, right? And so there is this potential, I'll say, for positive reinforcement of really leaning heavily into the individualistic side of things. And so me as a practitioner, when I am working with someone, I have to be very mindful of that's where my value holds, but I can't impart that on someone who is like working with me to try to up the ante and climb the ladder. That requires that, right? And so there again, it goes back to the self-reflective. Like, I have to be honest with myself in order to, because even as a practitioner, we're still leading people. But then you think about like the sports system that we tend to navigate, right? And so depending on if it is a traditional team sport or if it's an individual team sport or an individual sport, each three of those kind of spaces and places call for different things. Like on the surface, the traditional team sport says it's a collective thing, but at the end of the day, it's still an intra-team competition in order to get your spot.
Yeah.
Right. And so there are layers to that. So I think getting back to your original question in terms of like gender and race and culture and ethnicity and all of these things, and me kind of bringing it to this concept of, everything being a microcosm of society. I think it has a lot to do with what is influenced, what is emphasized, what we're socialized to believe. That can show up in how we even adopt different stereotypes of individuals and entities, right? So me, I self-identify, I subscribe as a woman, as a Black woman of African descent, specifically the diaspora. That plays into sometimes how I navigate leadership spaces, right? I am quick, like we're all quick, like we are very primitive, hence the zoology interest. We're very primitive. When we walk into a room, the first thing that we're doing is we're scanning the room for safety. Who can I identify with? And oftentimes when we're navigating leadership spaces and structures, there's a certain entity that tends to be in those structures more often than not. That loneliness creeps in big time. That sense of connection is challenged, right? The thwarted sense of belonging comes into play. And then you get into some of the spaces where people talk about imposter syndrome, which I am not one of those people that subscribe to that. I think imposterism is, no, we all belong. But again, that's my values, that's my philosophical approach coming into play. But I work with a lot of people who tend to subscribe to feeling like an imposter, right? So I say that because if I believe that everyone belongs, that I also believe that nobody owns a space. And sometimes that doesn't go over well when you're navigating certain leadership structures. Like, you have the audacity. That. Yes, I am very audacious.
You're like, I sure did.
I did.
Leah, what are some of your thoughts on this?
I think a lot about when I think about race and gender and sexual identity or orientation, I think about who gets to be a leader, right? And I think especially when we look at coaching spaces, of who gets to be a coach and who gets to be an athletic director. And, when I talk about things like this with my students, a lot of the things I talk about are this, like, what is the system that we're working in, right? And what gets perpetuated. And that we have a whole bunch of men coaching women's sports. We don't have a whole lot of women coaching men's sports. There's a couple, but there's always the argument, right? Of like, well, women don't play football. Women don't play blah, blah, blah sport. I'm like, okay, well, men don't play softball. So like, what are we talking about here? Right. And one of the things that I often use is the idea of like, when we passed Title IX, 90% of women's sports were coached by women. Right. And now we're at not even half. We're at like 45%, 46%.
Right.
Right. And part of that is because like, well, now those coaching positions were required to have like a normal salary. And so men applied for those jobs, right? And like, there's a really great quote that I think about a lot from Carol Hutchins, who was the softball coach at the University of Michigan. And she talks about how like, that people ask her, like, well, we don't know if these women are interested. And she's like, well, go get them. Right? We didn't wait for, like, her whole point was like, we didn't wait for Jim Harbaugh to write a cover letter and a resume to say, like, can I please be your football coach? Right? Like, we called him up and we said, I would like to pay you $1 bazillion to coach our football team. And he probably said yes. And that's like how the interview process went, right? Like, we don't recruit women in the same way either, right? To these bigger positions. And so when we think about like, who should be leaders, or who do we envision as leaders, or who do we want to see as leaders? And we talk a lot about like, oh, these groundbreaking women. It's like, well, did we have to break so much ground? Like, why did it have to be so hard for them to get into these positions? To your point, Angel, like, I think a lot about the system in which we elevate leaders and who gets to do the elevating and who gets elevated.
So this is the 80% Mental podcast. I'm here with Leah Washington, my co-host, and we are joined today by Dr. Angel Brutus. And we've been talking all about leadership and leadership identity formation and all of the different, what's the word I'm looking for? I've lost, it's late here. I've lost the ability to speak.
It's so late for you.
All of the different factors that might kind of play a role in that formation of a leadership identity. If you have, I literally cannot speak. If you are enjoying what you're listening to, please do subscribe at 80percentmental.com, where you can find all of our other episodes, or you can follow us on Twitter at EPM Podcast or on Instagram at 80percentmental. Dr. Brutus, it is the time of the podcast where we like to sort of take a bit of a departure from the topic and just get to know you a little bit more, get to know our guest. And in order to do that, I've got a little game that I like to play that we haven't got a name for. And it's just a sort of series of quick fire questions on a topic. Are you up for playing our little game?
Oh, absolutely. I'm ready. I like games.
Fantastic. Okay, so how it works is I've got a set of virtual envelopes. I've got 4 different categories of questions, and I'm going to ask you to select a number between 1 and 4, and that will determine the category of questions that we have. Do you want to hear the categories?
You know what? No, let's just
okay,
dive right in. Yeah.
All right, let's pick a number between 1 and 4 then, please.
Let's do 3.
Let's do 3. Okay, so category 3. Okay, so you've got favorites and firsts is our category. A series of quick fire questions. Don't think too much about it. Let's see what we get to. First one. Okay. Oh, favorite childhood TV show that you would still watch today?
Oh, Cosby Show.
I mean, slightly problematic these days, but I do.
All because of Claire Huxtable. Nobody else. That's the caveat.
Okay. Leah, what about you? Favorite childhood TV show you still watch?
That I still watch. This is an old show because I'm an old person. 3-2-1 Contact was my all-time favorite show on earth. It was basically about it was all about like science and exploration and like how like scientific,
because you're a nerd.
I'm so nerd. But it was like it was just so cool of like how do things like friction like act in the world. And then they used to have this like little segment at the end called the Bloodhound Gang, and that was where I was like, that was my jam, because they solved mysteries and I was like, hell yeah, I'm gonna be a Bloodhound Gang when I grow up.
Sounds awesome.
The best.
Yeah. Having said that, have you guys heard of Storybots?
Mm-mm.
No.
No.
My daughter watches Storybots. It's brilliant. It's these little sort of like cartoon robots, and they go around explaining lots of different things. I've learned loads. I watch loads of children's television.
Listen,
okay.
I have 3 kids, and our thing used to be watching Electric Company.
Yes.
Don't know that.
Yes, the Electric Company. Big fan.
I'll have to look that one up. Okay, let's move on. First friend you made at school?
Oh, her name was actually Angela.
Okay.
And we became friends because my name was Angel and her name was Angela. And we were like, it was during the time where I think it was Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder had, was it Ebony and Ivory? Was that them? Yes. And so that's, no, wait. Or was it Stevie Wonder?
It was Paul McCartney. Was that Paul McCartney?
Paul McCartney? I don't know. I know the song was out. And so we would walk around school calling ourselves Ebony and Ivory. You can guess why.
That's amazing.
I mean, on so many levels, that's amazing. Favorite smell that instantly takes you back in time?
Ooh. Cool water. Cologne. Unfortunately, it takes me back to my college days.
Fair enough.
Cool water cologne. Enough said. That's so embarrassing.
First, I mean, it's only going to get more embarrassing.
Outstanding answer.
Yeah. First fictional character that you had a crush on.
Ooh, He-Man. It did not take long for that answer. I mean, he never wore a shirt.
I feel like this is something you thought about before. This isn't.
No, this is so wrong. You have no idea. It's a little scary how quick he came to mind. It's amazing.
Right. Leah?
I'd probably say the Karate Kid.
He-Man. Oh my God.
I thought that the Karate Kid was so hot. Yeah.
He was.
Like,
He was.
I mean, it's trash, but like, let's be real.
Oh man, why did they ask these questions?
I don't know. Angel picked the topic.
I did.
Good point. Good point. Favorite person to be stuck in traffic with?
Oh, my daughter Harper. She has like a dark humor.
Okay.
And she doesn't laugh with it. She's 13 now, but she's had this dark humor since I can remember.
We love that.
First time you felt stage fright?
Today? Now? No, I'm just kidding. My very first speech in front of my high school class for some oratory like I wrote a paper and didn't realize that the prize was that I had to get up in front of the school in the auditorium and read it. That was awful.
Leah, what about you? Stage fright?
I'd probably say one of my early like gymnastics competitions. Yeah, like the fear of it's like the double-edged sword of like the individualistic, perfectionistic, I only want to be responsible for my own performance, but then, oh my God, I'm the only one responsible for my own performance. Yeah.
I think it was a school play when I was probably about 6 or 7. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
You bailed? Did you bail?
Not for me. Yeah, not doing that. Favorite thing about your current self?
So I'm about to give my 8. I am loving my mid to late 40s because it is really true. You really don't care anymore. You just don't. It's like, it is what it is.
I hear
Take
you.
it or leave it.
Absolutely with you on that. Okay, we'll finish with this one then. First piece of advice that you remember taking seriously.
Ooh, my best friend's dad is a pastor, and he was also the marriage counselor for my husband and I for premarital. And he sat us down and he said, no matter what happens in your marriage, remember that you all were here before the kids. And that has stuck with me.
Sounds like something He-Man would say at the end of an episode.
I mean, full circle moment. He-Man, cool water cologne. Let's go.
I'm sensing I'm learning so much about you, Angel. I love this.
I'm learning so much about myself. I have to reflect on this after we're done.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Brutus, thank you so much for playing our getting to know you game. I feel like we've gotten to know you a little bit better. Maybe a little bit too much.
Told you, it's those 40s. You get what you get.
So this is the 80% Mental podcast, and I'm here with Leah Washington, as usual, and Dr. Angel Brutus. We've been talking about leadership and leadership identity. Don't forget to subscribe at 80percentmental.com, or you can find us on Twitter at EPM Podcast or on Instagram at 80percentmental. We've got a couple of questions left for you, if that's okay, if we can kind of scoot back towards the topic at hand. I think one of the mistakes that we see quite often in sports, especially, is that when someone's good, right? When someone's like really talented, there's an assumption that they're also going to be a good leader. But they may not see themselves as a good leader or as a leader at all. They may not want that position. They may not sort of see themselves in that way. Again, just kind of like, do you have any thoughts about that? Like, do I have to develop a leadership identity? Like, is that something that I have to do? What are your thoughts on that?
I see this question and I'm like, oh, this is loaded. I'll give you raw thoughts. I instantly think about Eric Spoelstra, who's the head coach for the Miami Heat in the NBA. And in a million years, if you think about like the earlier stages of his career, like being like the film guy or something, like who would have ever said, oh, you're head coach material? And not only are you head coach material, but you're head coach material for an elite program, right? And yet here we are. And then you have individuals that I will not name who have high skills, high talent, and tried their hand at coaching, did not go over well, right? Yeah. So talent does not equate to leading in any way, shape, or form. But what I will say is that, again, if you're an intuitive person and you have a high level of self-awareness and a desire and a willingness to pull out the best in people, you still have a shot at being a leader. Because if you have those three things that are at the forefront of your approach, then really all you're doing is tapping into the potential of the people that you are charged to serve and creating a space to allow them to rise to the occasion. They can self-lead. You might be a guide, but they are the ones that are self-leading. And what better gift is that, right?
So I guess the kind of follow-up question then is, like, what do we do? What do coaches do, or organizations do, or like different programs maybe outside of sport do, when they maybe do see that spark and they do want to sort of encourage somebody to develop that identity as a leader? Like, what can people do? What are some of the things that maybe you've done in some of your work? I don't know if you've got any examples of that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is it goes back to the growth edges piece. Like, be willing to acknowledge what is not going well. Right? When you're willing to like sit with that opens up so much potential, right? I think about sport organizations who like sometimes dig their heels into, this is the way we're going to do it because this is the way that it's always been done. And even if you've had a winning culture, but that winning culture has come at a cost of toxicity, that's not sustainable. And it has implications for what kind of talent and characteristics and personalities you're going to attract to that, right? So it has consequences. It has an impact. It has an effect. So I think from a sport organization standpoint, there are a couple of things. If you tout and you have written and you have done trainings on your ethos of your organization and the values that you hold, but all of the behind the scenes behaviors and personality characteristics that don't align with that are persistent, at some point there has to be a self-assessment and a self-evaluation of what are we doing here. Something has to change. Either it is going to change the values that you have listed and be a little bit more real with what it is. Like, if you are a win at all cost organization, say that. Don't create this veil and pretend to be something that you're not. Because believe it or not, individuals who are attracted to that value and that philosophy will also migrate to you. So now you have a culture that's aligned, as opposed to pretending to be one thing, attracting a certain entity that is attracted to that thing, only for them to get into your system and then have a huge gap between their anticipation and their reality. Now we got bigger problems. Right? So I think it's owning who you are, standing in who you are, and being honest in articulating who you are as an organization, as a system. and trust people to make informed decisions about if they're going to join you or join someone else. It even goes back to the being voluntold into leadership. Sometimes it's like a begrudging leader is not a great recipe, right? Same thing for people who are choosing to join your system and your organization. If they're coming begrudgingly, it's starting off bad.
Yeah. So
and now we're working to recover.
Yeah. So this is where my bus is going. If you want to get on it, get on it. If you don't. But if you don't, it's going this way.
Yeah. Yeah. Let people be informed decision makers. And so I think the other part of that is, and that's honestly how you build trust. Because people are not getting what you didn't say.
Right.
Yeah, as you were talking about begrudging leaders, or how do we prepare people to be leaders? I think about, I almost made it this whole episode without bringing up hockey.
So close.
I know,
so close.
So close.
One day,
and I
one
did.
Day we'll do it.
Today's not that day. Like, I think a lot about Connor McDavid, who is the captain of the Edmonton Oilers, and he was the #1 draft pick overall in 2015. And they immediately made him captain when he was 18 years old. And he's the youngest captain that's ever been named to an NHL hockey team. And I think about, how he's had to grow into this role as a captain. How is that setting anybody up for success? First of all, you don't get the #1 draft pick by being a good team, right? So, first of all, this team's in a shambles. He's supposed to be the second coming, and he's got to save this franchise and be a captain on top of it. And he's barely not a child. Supposed to captain veterans on the team, supposed to captain rookies on the team. And I think a lot about this desire of when you have somebody who is super talented, and then you foist this other thing that they have to develop on top of that. How is that helpful in any kind of way? And I don't know what the Oilers organization did behind the scenes. Maybe they gave them a whole bunch of resources. I'm not really confident in that. But when we think about obviously this person's going to be a good leader, but from a systematic point of view, this person is in a transition in life. They're in a transition in role. They're in a transition in league of, talent. And I just think if we're truly going to value our athletes, how can I be as supportive as possible? And is making an 18-year-old captain of a professional team the best decision? It's splashy and it made a lot of headlines and everybody was really excited about it. But privately, I don't know what he felt about it. We've talked a lot about being voluntold to be leaders. Did he really have much of a choice in that? It probably appeared like he did on paper. It just is a really kind of microcosm of if we're looking at it from a systematic point of view, if we're looking at it from a collectivist point of view, if we're looking at it from an individualist point of view, does that decision make sense for the team, for the organization, and for that individual, and for that context of where they are? And so I think it's such an illustrative example of kind of all of the things that we kind of have been talking about.
There's this assumption that there's this, it goes back actually even, Pete, to your question earlier, there's this myth or this assumption that there's an inherent characteristic of leadership. Some people are kind of quote unquote born with it, or it's developed. And even in the sport context, there's this assumption that if an individual has had a longstanding career as an athlete, yes, there are transferable skills, but long after, they finish their sport trajectory and it's life after sport and they're moving into a different context, there's this assumption that they're also coming with these leadership skills that have been refined and developed over time. And a lot of that is, for some, is contingent on the type of leadership that they've been exposed to in that system. Right. So you just unlocked my brain again. I know we don't have time, but it just made me start thinking about like these assumptions that are held in these spaces of transition in and also out of sport. And that's actually something that my firm and I, we've been talking about in terms of when we're talking about supporting high performers in other domains and other spaces. Like you have training programs that are designed for, like, say, incoming people, and you might have training programs for people who are like making a transition to a different function, but you don't necessarily have dedicated training opportunities other than like maybe say like a 1 or 2 leadership training module or something, right? And so you just unblocked so many things in my brain that I can't think straight now. So thank you for that, Leah, for
You're
this
welcome.
doorknob session.
We love a doorknob moment.
I'm gonna give the last word to you, Dr. Brutus, and it's basically just from all of the stuff that we've talked about today. If there's one thing that you think our listeners would should focus on or could kind of take from this conversation, like what's one thing that jumps out to you as being, okay, like this is what you should take from this podcast?
I think it boils down to self-reflection, awareness, and willingness to execute values, maintaining a certain commitment to flexibility and agility. As you think about leadership development with regards to adjusting to circumstances and environments as it calls for, understanding the exposure to leadership experience, the different personality characteristics that are at play, and remembering that at the end of the day, it's not about us, and it's not even remotely about like the people who are in close proximity to us. It's about the people who are coming after us who don't even know that these opportunities exist yet.
Well, I think that is as good a place as any to wrap things up, and as good a message as any to finish up with. Dr. Angel Brutus, thank you so much for taking the time to come on 80% Mental. It's been an amazing conversation, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me get to know myself a little bit more through that game too.
We'll make sure that we put all of your details in our episode description. So if people want to reach out and get in touch with you or kind of check out your website, they can do that. But yeah, it just remains for me to say thank you once again for taking the time to speak to us.
No problem. We almost made the 2-hour mark. My goodness, I had fun with y'all.
I know we had some good things to say. I could talk about this for 1,000 years.
Well, if you enjoyed what you heard out there in listener land, don't forget to listen and subscribe. You can do that at the website at 80percentmental.com, or you can find us on Twitter at EPM Podcast or Instagram at 80percentmental. Go and check us out. Leave a comment. Who are some of the great leaders that you've come across? What do you think makes them good leaders? What are your own leadership qualities? It'd be really interesting to kind of hear your comments. That's all we've got time for on this episode. We will be back with more soon. But for now, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, but
well, we won't see you because it's a podcast. It doesn't work like that. Yeah.